Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 14th, 2024 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. This is a work session, specifically a budget work session. There will not be any public comment nor formal action taken by the council this evening. Town Manager Tony.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the Town Council. Today, the only item on the agenda is a FY25 budget work session that will be presented by our Finance Director. The purpose of this work session is to provide you all with a update on the FY25 budget development, to recommend strategies and actions related to council priorities outlined in the council retreat, explain budget considerations for the FY24-25 budget, and seek council direction in preparation for the final budget recommendation for the town of Carrboro. So I'd like to introduce our Finance Director, Brett, for the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening. Appreciate council having me. Third work session in a row for our group. It really is appreciated. The goal, as Patrice mentioned, is to just further iterate down this path towards a budget adoption. At this point in the stage, we're really looking for anything that's changed in the past 4 weeks, any other priorities or really dollar impacts that we want to, as a town and as a council, incorporate into the fiscal year 2025 budget process. We have select members of town staff available for questions this evening, basically department heads that have major drivers for new expenses, just if anything, really as a result of the council retreat back in February that we've attempted to incorporate and line item into the budget. So we'll start with a timeline. We'll progress through the deck, and then certainly feel free to interrupt me, ask upon others in the room if any questions arise. And again, appreciate the time, consideration, and most importantly, the direction as we work to adopt the balanced budget by July 1. So we did have a few changes on the throughout the deck. Nothing too material, but more just additional information. This is likely the most material change is the timeline that we're proposing at this point, based on where we are in the process, feedback from staff, where we think we can get the best product produced for the town in an efficient manner. So. Okay, yes, it is. Sorry, I use the same word too many times that I confuse myself. But as you see, we're towards the end of the process. So again, staff and department heads have led up valiant efforts to produce not only the budget numbers, but also the narratives and the connection to the race and equity lens, the climate action plan, their performance metrics, defining their org charts, just again in the vein of transparency, accountability, and being effective stewards of the town's dollars. So this is our proposed last work session formally this evening. Again, we'll show more numbers than the general trends that we presented back in April. My group has to aggregate some information for the town manager's office. We propose to do that by next week to give some time for review internally as staff. And then this is where the critical path gets a little tighter in terms of budget adoption. We have a notice period for the public hearing, which can be, as soon as we set the public hearing date formally, it can be anywhere within that timeline, which is why there's a very wide range. That's a very simple process in this whole simple step of this process. We have now proposed, instead of next Tuesday, to have June 4th as the town manager's office presentation of the budget to town council. That is, last year, just for perspective, that happened on the 6th of June. There is now a relatively tighter turn time with the new schedule And the proposal is to have the public hearing and the budget adoption on the same day of June 18th and be finished with the 2025 fiscal year budget on the 18th of June at some point in the evening. That is a bit scary to have the public hearing and the adoption scheduled for the same date. However, based on some prior year analysis, it seems like there's not been many material changes that have been presented publicly at that last moment. If that is the case, where there are public comments that are not presented until that date, we plan to have staff available to make those changes really on the fly, to not have to go out another week or get closer to that July 1 adoption date. So we'll be prepared to handle public feedback and be prepared to have the budget available statutorily for public viewing 10 days prior to that public hearing. So it'll be available online, it'll be available at Century Center, it'll be available here in hard copy form for public comments leading up to that public hearing date. The goal, again, being to have as much public comment as we can in advance of that date, and incorporate those comments through council direction, accordingly. And so we can all do the math. That's 33 days until that date. So that's a big deadline, a big hurdle, a big opportunity for the finance group, and we're excited to be able to produce a final product, and hopefully a final product through town manager's office, obviously well in advance, to give at least 2 weeks for review and consideration. So moving along, this slide was presented in the packet produced last week. It's reformatted a little bit to hopefully add some clarity and transparency. We didn't really feel that suggested general fund appropriation was necessarily a revenue source, at least in the long term. So we decided to break that out to show that that's the lever that we're considering balancing the budget with this next fiscal year, with more details there'll be more details defined in future slides, but they're all familiar to council and based on council recommendations. You can see that there are good stories to be told on this slide, and revenues are trending up. Expenses, we don't think we're going to hit the adopted budget of last year, which is just a data point, right? I don't know, that's not necessarily a good thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we don't anticipate spending what we had adopted a year ago this time for fiscal year 2024. That being said, there's an opportunity, we feel as staff, to invest heavily in various aspects of the town and still maintain a healthy fund balance, as we'll see in future slides, and get that money working back into the community. So again, moving left to right deliberately and slowly through this slide, because there are a fair amount of numbers. The left column is just what was adopted in the budget book last June. The middle column of numbers is an extrapolation of what we've incurred as a town, both revenue-wise for collections and expenditures through April 30th, and then, where applicable, expanding that out 2 more months of the fiscal year to get a complete picture of a forecast, as opposed to a snapshot of a picture of numbers back in time a year ago. So we feel like the italicized column is more relevant to compare against in terms of preparation and suggestions for the 2025 fiscal year budget. The percent changes, again, they are slightly more aggressive than a similar revenue slide that was presented last month. We had 1.5% on the ad valorem taxes. Based on the collections that we've seen through April 30th, we've already exceeded the 15.8 million number and see that going up marginally. So we are more comfortable with suggesting a still modest and conservative 3% increase on the property tax side, especially with anticipated residential pockets of delivery, throughout town. No 100 or 200 or 400 unit developments, but 6, 7, 8 unit complexes. Additionally, the sales tax story, We have not changed staff's not changed our recommendation on that to keep that conservative at 2.5%. That seems to be a trend coming out of COVID, where we saw an exponential growth on that category across the state. And we've seen that slow, I guess would be the appropriate term. So we still see growth opportunities and natural organic growth based on sales. The sales tax revenue isn't reliant upon new business solicitation or it's really an organic, more volume. We think that'll continue to happen within town, and COLA and prices and natural growth. So we feel comfortable with a conservative 2.5% on that line item. Other revenues aggregates to a relatively substantial number. That's all your permit fees, everything that was broken out last session. The big driver there that skews the percentage up to 5.7% is a direct offset on the stormwater, the additional stormwater revenue that was adopted last month in April, which is offset directly in operating expenses. So that does skew that line item. If you stripped out that $160,000, it would be a flat 2.5% assumption. Again, not considering at this point for budget purposes revamping any fees. That is a goal and a performance metric of various departments within the town. Some may get incorporated into the budget, but likely that would be additive to the revenue forecast by the time we adopt the budget, if those changes are approved by council when recommended. So a lot of words going into that, which is why we felt for conservative budgeting purposes on the revenue side not to include those in the forecast. Contrastly, the elephant in the room, that's probably too harsh a term, is the expense increase. So the expenses, the first line item there is 60 to 65% of the total expenses of the town annually, and that's personnel. So that 11.7%, if I remember correctly, yes, incorporates the recommendation for the one-time adjustment to staff personnel. It also incorporates a suggested COLA for both the existing staff, as well as new positions, to get us up to that 11.7, not as round a number as you've seen in prior presentations. But again, conservative on the expense side. We're not necessarily convinced we'll come in at that number, but it feels like if we were at full employment, that's what the town would incur on expense-wide on personnel. And then more directly, it's a big increase on the operating expense side. And that's due to a number of factors, none of which should be surprising, except for a $2.6 million number. We did get good news since last work session. We're now anticipating an increase of only, and I use that hesitantly, only 6% on the transportation agreement. So we feel that number for fiscal year 2025, which you'll see more formally presented in the budget proposal, is a $2.3 million number instead of a $2.7 million number that we were working with last year. So about a $400,000 savings on that line item. However, additional programming that we'll outline in future slides are going into that operating expense number, including the staffing study, the compensation study, the portion of the land use ordinance rewrite, some cost for new software and additional licensing on software as a service that has been due for the town. But again, we'll step through that. And at the end of the day, that last, I don't know if it's the right term, that operating surplus or deficit, that could be a Brett term, but it's simply revenues less expenses. And so we see operating effectively at a negative here. And then going back and putting some numbers behind the story that we've been telling since the start of the calendar year is that the fund balance is growing, and we anticipate that to continue to grow. And we feel like it's a point that staff would recommend to council to reinvest those dollars instead of growing that percentage of unassigned fund balance in future years. So it was recommended last year at this time at about a $2.5 million appropriation. We don't see that hitting $1 million for this fiscal year. And then you'll see you see that increase of 4.765 million recommended for next year, effectively as a one-time investment into the town and the operations going forward. And then lastly, and reinforcing, and we'll get to it on the next slide, which is already included in your packet, is that if all these numbers played out, the unassigned fund balance would remain almost 40%, which, doing the math, is about 5 months of operating expenses for the town, which is still above the targeted range for the town of 22.5% to 35%, but back almost in line. So we didn't want to, and I'll show it on the next slide, but we didn't want to get too far ahead of the skis, but we did want to recognize that the town has some opportunity to make some investments in its operations and in its personnel and in other council directives at this point in time. So this slide, again, it's a small snapshot of a very detailed model that we've stepped through in March a little bit. This includes capital projects. It includes any scenario planning that the town wants to do on the operating side. For instance, we're considering, as a result of the staffing study, that it will recommend additional staffing for the town across departments. So we've included 15 additional personnel at a median salary effective 1/1/2025 into the budget numbers as they stand today. But again, this reiterates the point being where we think where the unassigned fund balance as a percent of the town's expenditures landed last year at 49%, almost 50%, well above the target. And again, each percentage point is roughly $250,000, very, very roughly, but that's a good barometer. Not to be confused with the value of a penny is roughly $250,000 as well, which is kind of weird. But this outlines that. Importantly, the column header 12 base current tax rate does not include the penny and a half that is dedicated to affordable housing. So oftentimes we will see that 60-cent number, which includes that 1.5%. But for modeling purposes, it's not included because it's in and out in terms of percentage of the general fund. So the point here was to show growth rates historically for a year or two. Kind of once you get further back with COVID, it skews a little bit of the modeling functionality. But the goal in showing this was that even with a heavier investment recommended for next fiscal year, the town is still conservative, solid financially and fiscally, and there is no fiscal cliff that we have put in some scenarios in March that showed that number go down drastically, and what your decision today can impact how the town's financial health could be impacted in 7 years, 10 years, 12 years. So now the only changes back to the packet presented last week to council might be some verbiage on these. Materially, the numbers have not changed, but the goal here was to show council what staff has identified as new expense drivers and help to illustrate kind of where that $2.5 million operating expense increase, where that's coming from. What is not on this slide, and I'm still, as a personal goal, trying to quantify better, is the impact of the delivery of the 203 project. That's currently slated to deliver, in modeling purposes, in July, so almost a full fiscal year impact of custodial, of electricity, of water, 50,000 square feet at $2.50 a foot. That's another $125,000 for electricity alone. So it's going to be fairly impactful for a cost, operating cost perspective. But we didn't know if it was really new, but it's a development project, but it's a consideration, and it is part of that budget number. But 203 delivery aside, and knowing that can fluctuate based on delivery and CO and construction and all the fun stuff that the development brings with it, these were the focal points and meant to be aligned with council directives from February and earlier. So again, reiterating the investment in the staff. It's a three-channel approach. It's investment in the studies to determine where the effective staffing is, where additional needs could be identified in terms of personnel. Most of that has been incurred in fiscal year 2024. There will be some bleed over into fiscal year 2025 for the spend. There's an update to the comp study that was completed in 2022. But with, again, coming out of the pandemic, we felt the town recommends that it's time for an update of that. That's a $50,000 commitment in the budget numbers for next year. And then going kind of from bottom up, the big one is that 10% that we've presented. This, I think, is the third time. And a 3% COLA aligns with CPI, which is trending. It's really one source, but depending on the area, between 3.1% and 3.4%. So you'll see it in an appendix slide, which is a new one to this deck, and the only one I'm going to touch on in the appendix, I promise, how that aligns historically, which I believe was a directive from council coming out of last work session. And a future slide will show more of the direct dollar impact of this particular investment. And then again, we do have Trish in the audience today. If there are further questions, there's rightfully so some investment that is put towards the planning department as I won't call them one-time, but irregular expenses that are going to be part of the operational or are part of the operational budget as it stands right now. I meant to say that I don't anticipate the expense side of the equation going up any further from any of the future numbers you all may see. It might come down a bit, but again, this is just where it stands point in time today. So that $225,000 number might sound non-familiar, not familiar, because it's, after looking at it, we don't think that we'll be able to incur the whole $450,000 investment in fiscal year 2025. So now it's split in the model into two tranches, 50% each. And then technology, it's technology, God bless them, they have the burden for all the technology across all the departments, falls into their budget. So, which is great from a controls perspective, but it shows that their increased cost year over year jumps out. Especially when you look at either the dollars or the percentages compared to some other departments. So we have new software that spans multiple departments. It's project management software, it's community engagement software, it's disparate across departments and uses. Also, software as a service is probably almost trending to be not a buzzword anymore, and maybe be at some point sunsetting into something else cool. But it's still a heavy part of the upkeep. I'm sure Andy would not appreciate that comment, but for the upkeep and the continued security and functionality of all the software that the town currently is invested. So, although it's a substantial 7-8%, of the $30 million that we're showing as additional expenses, it's not many bullet points that are making up those new asks. To put it in perspective, from my ability to discern last year's budget proposal, there was really no investment aside from a salary adjustment for all staff, but there didn't appear to be as much investment in some of these other needs for the town. Certainly the town has been working extremely hard in identifying these needs, spending where appropriate in the interim, and then of course developing the recommendations for future budget years, including fiscal year 2025. Moving along, this is a repeat. So this was in the deck last month. This is just to reframe and hopefully show that we're going to go one layer deeper and show some dollars associated with each of these directives. Basically short term, long term. We as staff didn't necessarily feel appropriate to try to triangulate heavy lift or lighter lift into this presentation, although know that, that's been discussed. But the last two slides of the deck before I get to the one in the appendix focus on directly the dollars, and not even dollars in the budget, but just dollars that the town is recommending to commit or has already committed to these initiatives, and try to correlate those two, as effectively as possible. Again, some of these have been council approved, some of these will be part of the recommended budget. And we don't necessarily need, I will touch on the bold, but not necessarily the sub-bullets. $2.1 million investment. Again, that's about 7% of the total operating budget, so heavy in terms of dollar-wise. Investment in staff, both existing staff, retention of existing staff, how we can better recruit going forward, and having the tools in our arsenal to make those strategic decisions. And then, adjusting the publicly available pay scale, with recommendations from the studies. But that's the heaviest proposed investment in the next fiscal year, from July 1 to June 30. Certainly, the land use rewrite. We heard that over and over, and continue to hear it and understand the importance of that. You can see we're developing the scope and the RFP, and anticipate that commencing July 1, right? And moving that along as quickly as possible. Economic development. I know we have some specific questions with that, but it'll align a lot with the downtown study that's going on. Certainly additional loan opportunities for businesses. We do have funding still available as part of our ARPA dollars, for that initiative. Again, knowing that ARPA sunsets effectively, programming has to be obligated and contracted calendar year 2024, spent by calendar year 2026, with the risk that anything that falls out of contract in calendar year 2025 or 2026 cannot be re-obligated, recontracted, or reused. So, as you'll hear in future council sessions, our recommendation is to try to get spend substantially complete or very risk-averse investment decisions this calendar year. Environment, certainly there's it's a pillar, it's a council pillar. So as staff, we're trying to recommend the best way to utilize that or allot funds to that pillar. We do have a lot of programming in place. They tend to be smaller dollar projects, but the creation of the department, having the recommendations from staff experts, it has been helpful in advancing that. We did just finish the fleet study, so there are going to be in the proposed budget some capital recommendations that will help steer us towards potential investment on alternate fuel vehicles. More so in the long term, but some impact in fiscal year 2025. And again, these we're trying to touch on and apply dollars to some of the longer term objectives, just to, again, reinforce and illustrate that we're not procrastinating or we're not sitting on these and taking for granted that they are long term, however that may be defined individually. But the town recognizes the importance of these directives and is suggesting or has already approved targeted funding. I know we talked last month fairly extensively about race and equity, and most importantly, we had that phase 2 of the Family Financial Assistance Program approved. We still continue to have the approval for the Community Safety Task Force. The Language Access Plan has already been adopted currently, as Kat presented to this group, to council, seeking some more grant opportunities in that space to even build upon what's already been established by her group. And then again, the placeholder for just funds available for things that come up in the next year. The budget's just a snapshot in time. We don't know what all the programming is going to be for the next 12 months. So we wanted to be cognizant of that, build it into our expense forecast, and plan for it, knowing that there are plenty of opportunities around that space, within Carrboro. One of the best stories I think that we can tell as a result of the ARPA funding, and someone mentioned transformational. I think this is one of the ones that could be considered transformational as the investment, in both Empower and Habitat that has been discussed over the past 2 months with council and approved by council, and seeing how that, how that plays out. And that one is, one of the longer term deliveries that will extend well beyond calendar year 2024. Although I feel like we've put enough protections in place as the town perspective for our investment to be impactful and not have to ever think about recouping any of those funds. But even in addition to the ARPA, a significant portion of the balancing act of the budget has been working towards just the operations of human services, in addition to the penny and a half. And the recommendation, recommendation to council from staff last work session was to assign a percentage of 2% of the operating budget to go to that fund, which we feel is appropriate. I know there's been a lot of good news in the state recently, most notably Raleigh committing $5 million to homelessness efforts, which is it's about 0.8% of their budget, just saying, to put it in perspective and lens that a little bit. So I think the town, percentage-wise, shows that they're committing, more of their general operating fund. And I don't know if you're even allowed to make that comparison, but I did it. So really good articles around what they're trying to do, not only the dollars, but the program behind it, and some of the themes that they've seen from impacted folks that these dollars are targeting. So I know that our staff has been on top of that and considering where we can maybe suggest best practices going forward. But I think it was a pretty pivotal recommendation last work session of going to that model, and it allows for future growth organically. As revenues grow, so does the allocation to the human services. So that, again, that's not new. That's just a recap. And then lastly is on the longer term multimodal and greenway investment and Bowling Creek and all the other partnership agreements, as I'll call them, as being a layman. The town has done a great job aligning these partnerships and has solicited significant matches, if not the town being a very minority investor in these public projects for the good of the infrastructure surrounding town, whether it's sidewalks or greenways or countless others. But we, like the bullets say there, we're identifying those. We're looking at the backlog. We're holding back a little until 203 gets a little bit more clear, and then we'll have better definitions. So that's why there aren't as many dollars on that last bullet, but know that the staff is actively presenting internally and aware of the importance identified by council for those operating directives. So I put this one in the appendix and appreciate town staff helping me out to develop this. It's a pretty interesting infographic. This comes from the League of Municipalities. They do an annual survey, so it's subjective in nature, but we feel that most town staffs across the state are relatively honest. So it shows a pretty long history and run rate. It doesn't give totals, unfortunately, so my totals on there in red are guesses, but they look pretty darn close. But you see, it tells a story that we've all felt, whether it's in our paychecks, in our grocery bills, in our mortgages, if we've done that recently. Just the cost of things, and the CPI is the line, and then the merit increases and cost of living increases averaged across the state. So that's agnostic of size, area. That's just all the 552 municipalities put together, not weighted, simple average, and where they math out. So where we saw coming out of COVID a pretty big increase, not only in CPI, but also adjustments to wages within state employees. You can see the run rate in the bullet down in the bottom left, what the town of Carrboro invested back into its town staff, and then put this quick table together to show hypothetically someone earning $50,000 a year back at that, 2021, before the first increase of the 7.5% average across the state, where they would land today, and where with the proposals in place and the recommendations in place, where they would land fiscal year 2025. So it puts some, we feel like it puts some meat behind the story. It puts some numbers and data to show that this is an adjustment recommended by staff to get compensation close to the average. We did not feel as staff that it's overstepping, but it's more aligning. So there is one assumption on this slide, is that back in fiscal year 2023, the town gave a flat, intentionally so, flat adjustment to pay of $3,000, and I made the assumption that equated to around 5% in my table. So that's the only assumption that I didn't outline on paper, and that's the 3K down here to the 5% right there. And that really, there are a couple other slides. This one just is new since last week, so I appreciate the opportunity to at least show it to the council. I didn't think it was as material as the first one. It just shows just focusing on the cost of living increase. It breaks it down by population. So again, it's a pretty sterile delineation across the municipalities of the state, without some of the context that we've been discussing about identifying a more relevant peer group to the town of Carrboro, which is another deliverable that we owe council that has been a challenge to find, but we're working through that and know that we owe it to council. And once we identify that peer group, I feel we can add as many columns as we need to for comparisons and be an effective tool for future considerations. And then the last two were just repeats from the last slide deck, just showing and identifying, the considerations we went into this, try to be eyes wide open, and incorporate these considerations into the actual numbers. And with that, I will open it up to anyone and everyone.
Thank you so much, Brett. Can you go back to the other objectives? That was your last slide. And so these 4 items you're going to work to incorporate them this time as well, this budget cycle.
Yeah, so we feel like we've moved fairly substantially on the first bullet,
Right.
with ARPA. The last 3 need some work.
Yep.
And we might see some of to be honest, I don't think we'll see that incorporated into the budget preparation. I don't think
Not the last 3 is what you're
Correct.
saying. It's coming up.
there are
Probably.
goals of staff to update the capital improvement program.
Right.
There will be recommendations, obviously, for capital investment in this fiscal year, but not for the update of that document before June 1. The review and update of the town fee schedule is a very simple bullet that is being unwound by many different departments. So I think we will, as a town, see benefits from those suggestions. But again, we're not going to, at this point, staff is not recommending incorporating that into additional revenues in the budget prep.
Thank you.
And then the last bullet is pretty big catch-all. So
Revenue diversification initiatives for both.
So the one not included there that I think staff has presented numerous times and council has considered, and we await to see where it goes, is parking. So that, but again, wasn't about to go down that rabbit hole and assume anything for the budget preparation on the revenue side, especially knowing what could happen on the expense side of that equation.
Right.
So,
Smart.
but that kind of triggered that revenue diversification
Okay.
phrase.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation in the second work session for the town budget. Council members, any questions? Mayor Pro Tem now.
Thanks, Brett. Overall, I'm feeling great about this. I think that the, clarity and level of detail and tracking against our objectives and sort of the iterative process has been stellar. I think it was a good move to have, in some ways, a pretty, simple talk last month. I think as we move toward a more complete picture, it's, you've iterated this nicely. I think it's difficult for me to see how we're not on really strong footing. I appreciate the consideration against the fund balance and the historical perspective. I feel really confident in it and grounded that we're making the right choices. I feel assured that we have had a different tone over the past couple of years, as you're aware, of the possibilities of fiscal cliffs. And so to know that we are being really conservative and not seeing that kind of situation, while still aligning on some priorities and particularly investing in our staff, is all of this. The headline here is, I'm feeling great. I think you're doing great work. And to that end, I don't, it's hard. I don't have too many questions. Bullet 2, update of the capital improvement program. Last month, I believe there was some talk of, your insomnia on this front. Can you just characterize a little bit the conversations that have happened in the past month among staff about, sort of how we see that taking shape? And, you seem rested and alert tonight, and the picture overall seems, confident. So it seems to me like there has been movement here that is maybe premature to characterize too much, but I'm curious what it would be.
Certainly. So I think I mentioned last time that's near and dear to my heart is capital planning and forecasting, and we asked for everything and only get a small piece of the pie in any organization that I've ever been associated with, correct? So what perhaps contributed to lack of sound sleep, over 2 months ago was, coming into spaces like Century Center and Town Hall and knowing from my limited background the amount of dollars it would take to rehab existing facilities, and knowing how far the joke was made earlier before the recording started about the emergency generator kicking in. But that for a building like this, that could be $750,000 to put that in. And I think we had spoke about, and the council approved that would be 75% of the renovation budget for Town Hall. So at one point, so the sky's the limit in terms of where we could prioritize. So it comes down to that effort. So I think we have focused the town staff, and I feel welcome any other conversations from staff that are present. But the focus right now is delivering 203, getting that one online, seeing how that folds into the equation. We're continuing to make investments as prudent, like the chiller project over at Century Center. Relatively low dollars, I would say, not transformative, but there is a return on investment associated with those. But it's really still not the where is Carrboro 10 years from now picture. I believe there was a recommendation or a suggestion from council last work session to tour these facilities. So I don't think there's been heavy movement and identification of projects. The staff has invested in a new project manager who's doing a great job of communicating the existing projects right now. I think the next step for investment on the capital side, realistically, is continued investment in the fleet. There'll be a recommendation as a precursor for a continued allocation towards an additional fire engine that'll come on the 4th of June as part of the budget, but not getting behind in that game, and layering in the pillars and the council directives with these investments. And I think that's more where that conversation has been going. I think we are being more realistic in terms of modeling. It doesn't directly correlate, I don't think, to next year's budget, but just saying that maybe instead of a $1 million number, it's a $37 million number. Yeah. So what does that do? And then if you layer that in with the debt burden of 203 right now, but the Fire Station 2, I believe we pay off this fiscal year. So I think that's, that one's off the books. So that's $300,000 less of debt obligation the town is incurring annually. So so I think we're triangulating around recommendations. If that helps, I think we've identified where the needs are. I think we're considering other sources. I happened to have the opportunity to go to a training that said if your existing infrastructure happens to lie within this type of zoning, that there's possibility to get federal money, whatever that means, to help move that facility. So it would be money potentially not on the town residents, but from another source. So I think staff is considering everything. I think there's a lot of investment and time for staff on the day-to-day, and looking beyond that, it can be a challenge. But the needs are there, and I think that's how I would answer it.
As long as you feel that we are taking enough steps early enough, I share your sense, and I think we all do, that we got some big numbers to work through, and as long, your answer is appreciated. Otherwise, the only other thing here that really is top of mind for me is making sure that our ability to implement the parking possibilities is accounted for, and I think that that's a fairly heavy expense. If I recall, we're talking ballpark of like the 300,000s. We've been talking about that for about a year now, and I would really, given the overall rosiness, I appreciate the conservatism. Again, I don't want to characterize this in any way other than laudatory toward the overall preparation here. But given that it seems like we're on good footing, that is not somewhere I would want to let the foot off the pedal too much. Given that if it's not accounted for this coming year, it would be 2 years of discussion before we were talking about getting revenue out of that. Otherwise, for me, I'm feeling pretty good.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Frey.
Brett, just a couple follow-up questions, all I think about stuff that's already on your slides. So for the $275K in SaaS, you said that was across a variety of different software products.
Yes.
Are those ramps that were baked into the contracts to start with, or are these new increases from the vendors?
I will choose not to answer that, but follow up with you on a response.
Of course. Thank you so much.
I think I know the answer, but I'm not going there.
All right. Let me see here. I wanted to ask if you have any context, and feel free to let me know if I should be asking other staffers, a context about splitting up the LUO over 2 years. You said that, you sort of looked like you realized that you couldn't move it that fast. Is that the reason for splitting the $450K over the 2 years?
So I can defer or I can take a stab at it, but so I'll take a stab at it, I guess, is what I just said.
Thanks.
But then I'm happy to be overridden. It just seemed, from the conversations, it seemed like it was a 12 to 24 month project, so we wouldn't incur all the costs in fiscal year in the current fiscal year. So I had tweaked 300, 150, was still carrying the full amount over 2 years, and that might be more realistic and something for staff to consider is the timing of that breakdown. The point I was trying to show here was that and wanted to be transparent to council that we didn't anticipate it all being spent in fiscal year 2025.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are we pretty clear now that 450 includes the whole rewrite project, or is there I guess my question is, are there other expenditures that will need to be budgeted to get us to the point where we have a draft land use ordinance to adopt? I'm trying to make sure we've got all the pieces of this project puzzle together, even if they're not all in the next fiscal year.
Sure. I believe they are all accounted for. They are some smaller dollar amounts that are additional ads that didn't make it to the slide deck that are associated with, tangentially, you could call it, to the land use project with their own name. But I think Trish would attest that they're all in her ask and in the department ask and in the town's needs. So, yes.
So much. Trish or Marie, is there anything else you want to kick in there as far as context to help us understand sort of what fits into that dollar amount and what accounts for the timing of it?
Well, we have to see what the market's going to say when we put requests on the street. So
I think that's one reason. That's one reason I wanted to follow, because I think I'd heard like numbers, a wide array of numbers batted around for how much the rewrite would cost us, and this is actually a pretty pleasing number compared to some of the ones I was hearing. So I was sort of like, hey, is this the whole thing? Is there something else?
I feel like it isn't the whole thing.
well, I mean, you know, what's shown on the other slide that Brett showed is that there is an area plan, another small area plan that's included. That's not part of the money we're talking about right here, and that is shown on the slide.
Right,
So,
gotcha, I did see that one.
and that, I mean, the comp plan calls for us to do at least 2 other area plans, and, you know, we did bundle, and we were able to have that included in the downtown plan, the Jones Ferry Corridor, which was one of the small areas. So we have at least one more that's shown in the FY25 budget here. And so, you know, there is one other one that is part of it as well. When we're preparing, you know, when the budget recommendation is coming forward next year, there may be a discussion about wanting to budget for that one. So if we're able to do this one, because getting the small area plans in place is going to give us some more of the details that will help us inform what the regulation should be for those areas. And so how might we shape a zoning district that meets the, you know, kind of vision that's laid out for those areas. So, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. I think as a follow-up, just to repeat the question, do you feel like at the end of 24 months, we have a new ordinance, or are we still somewhere else in the process?
No, I think that within 24 months, we can have a new ordinance. I think that, I mean, there may be some other steps. The rezonings may not all be done to comply with the ordinance. It may be that we are in the process of getting those regulations in place, and then we've got to implement them, you know, by having that step occur as well. So, but I think that the evaluation, and when I say evaluation, I mean we're going to draft stuff. We need to compare it to what we have, sort of for the delta. We need to look for where we're hitting the mark and where we're not hitting the mark. You know, where are we set it? Where does it meet the vision? Where are there gaps? And that kind of thing. So, in any case, I think within 2 years, yes, I think we will have a new ordinance that will be that will have a new structure. It will have significantly, you know, changed pieces of it, updated regulations. We will make sure our stormwater regulations are as good as they can be, and clear, you know, as simple as it can be, as accessible as it can be. Yeah, I think that's within 2 years.
Thanks so much. That answers my question.
You're welcome.
So Brett, just to wrap, I really appreciate the approach you took here. I can tell that you're, you know, being conservative both with our revenues and with our expenses. You heard what we said about, you know, bringing the reserve back down towards our historic target, but you've been very careful to make sure that you're not bringing it down too sharply. Just want to say thanks for the thoughtfulness that goes into this.
We just get to tell the story. It's all the staff's work. So
Please make sure you pass that on. All right, we really appreciate it.
All right.
Councilmember Haven O'Donnell.
A bunch of little questions, but you know, first, I really appreciate the fact that not only the finance department but staff in general are looking at the most reasonable way to move forward with so much it being unknown. I think it, you know, feeling like the over the last 3-4 years, so much has shifted, and there's so much that is still unknown, and looking forward to what is yet to be seriously unknown between now and November, and trying to do a budget before November. So I appreciate the idea of looking forward with a very pragmatic eye. I think that's going to be really important. And to do so in such a way that if there needed to be a sudden shift, you'd have cushion to do so. And I say that because we are in the most unprecedented times in my life. And I'm very sensitive to, that this, that Carrboro be as flexible and resilient going forward. So I really appreciate that, and the and the departments for looking at that. So I have a couple of questions, and let me see. The easiest. Let me start. I'm going to go slide by slide. Okay. First of all, regarding the pairing of the public comment on the same day as adoption, and you said 10 days prior, information will be posted. I would like to ask that we have communications work with y'all so that the public understands why that date was chosen and that fusion is being recommended, and that I don't know what it's going to take to get that message out, but we have to get ahead of that perception that pardon?
That we're rushing through. Maybe.
Exactly.
We got a month.
Yeah. So I'd get on that pronto to say, here's the situation, and here's why, and work with us. Any questions you have, here's the link to where we are up to date. Ask your questions now. No question is ridiculous. That's number one. So beyond public notification of just putting it on the website, I would ask staff to put their heads together with communications and really think about how best to get information out, whether it's to get flyers at the parks or at the kiosks or all of it, everywhere. Because what I want is for the town to say, this is what we're doing. We want you to know well in advance, because we really haven't done it this before, and here's why we're in the crunch. Okay. On the operational budget slide, if you could go to that slide. Oh, there you go. Okay, I want to understand. I wasn't able to digest the numbers fast enough. So where it says other revenues, clarify for me from the 2.5 to the 5.7 one more time, because our copy says 2.5.
So that the difference between the 2.5 and the 5.7 is the additional revenue from the adopted stormwater policy,
Got it. Okay, I wrote that in my notes, but I just
which is offset in the operating expenses.
Yeah, perfect. And then on the operating under expenses, okay, so where we've got from 3% to 11, one more time, I'm reading my notes, but so, ours says 3% and the change is 11.7.
So my recommendation would be to use this one presented as a slip sheet for the one presented last week.
Okay.
We were able to flesh out additional breakdowns and show the actual comparison.
Okay.
And again, to that 11% is effectively two components. It's the proposed 10%, which crosses multiple personnel accounts, so retirements and insurances and all those fun things in addition to salaries, as well as additional staffing recommendations that we're anticipating to come from the staffing study. So
Perfect.
those are the two that make up that 11.7.
Yeah. And then from the 2.5 to the 24.7,
So that 2.5 should be ignored. So the future slides hopefully explained the majority of that 2.588, I think it was, increase year over year operationally. And that's really was the point of the next slide for the new expense drivers, over $400,000 in IT, like we talked about, probably $250,000 to $500,000 as a result of the delivery of 203.
okay, so, yeah, is there, could there be a slide or some kind of cheat sheet that would show that breakout of what those things are? Perfect. Okay. I understand that part of that 11.7 is also looking at employees that still need to be. How many more employees need to be hired? Do we have a number
In terms of
to get to
our
full
current-
employment?
To full employment,
To get us to.
I will defer.
Can you come up to the microphone?
Say Julie.
Julie Eckenrod, HR. Thank you, Julie.
I believe it's under 15. The majority of those are in our emergency services.
Oh. Police and fire and,
That
wow.
probably represents about 12 of the 15.
What was that?
Emergency services is probably about 12 of the 15.
Police.
Yeah, I know that's police and fire. Is it more one than the other?
Police.
I'm just following up. Apologies, Councilmember Haven O'Donnell. On those vacancies, and I'm sure it's been presented before, but you said about 12 are emergency services, more in the police department. Do you know, like what that number is for the police department? And if you
Yeah.
don't, it's fine. You can follow up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We'll send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Was that all you need from
No, well, from Julie, yeah, no, I don't.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think Julie, you could.
Julie? It's good. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, so the next part I wanted to understand, and I believe it's, where it says operating surplus deficits. Just go through that one more time with me.
So that's just the difference between the total revenue, and the
Sure.
total expenses.
Right,
So obviously, the state requires all municipalities and government entities to produce a balanced budget.
right,
So this was just a plain look of, with all the asks from all the departments and the forecasted revenue growth, where we would land with no levers being pulled. And the one lever we are recommending being pulled right now is to dip into that the unassigned general fund balance as a percent of the expenditures, which is now forecasted to be close to 60% at the end of this fiscal year.
Wow.
So that's the balancing beam, or the whatever term you want to use for the balanced budget equation as presented, subject to council direction, of course. There's numerous ways we can change that number, but that was a very good recommendation to break that line out of revenues and just show it and try to highlight it better than what you have from last week, kind of bunched in together.
and I don't know that you necessarily know that, but what does that look like over the last 5-6 years? That, in
I
terms
can
of,
get back to you on that.
okay,
I do know that last year it was, I think, 2.404 million was the suggested amount, which we don't see the town utilizing that full allotment. And it's certainly not carryover or taking unspent dollars in one fiscal year and applying to the next fiscal year. It's going back, seeing where the fund balance stands, where we think as of 6/30, and then making a recommendation for next fiscal year, agnostic of operations in fiscal year 2024.
And okay. To the new expenses for fiscal year 25, the getting back to the land use ordinance, I really appreciate breaking it into 2 cycles. I think that's going to be important. Just clarify for me, I want to make sure I didn't mishear this, that 225 also includes the consultant, or is that on top of, is that to begin the process after a consultant is paid, or does that include consultant?
So I would frame it, the 450 over the 2 years includes the consultant.
Okay.
And it's, I think, maybe it's outlined in a later slide, to rely heavily upon such consultant and less reliance on existing staff.
Right. And is that something, well, I'm supposing that once a contract is signed, that's the ceiling for the consultant, or?
I believe we could structure it that way.
I'm just asking because, I've watched what happened with the 203 project, and, who knows what they're going to be up against when they're doing the land use ordinance. We've been band-aiding it so long. I have no idea. I mean, it's a project that I can't even conceive of how they're going to, do it, and much less do it in 2 years, but still.
So we to reiterate that point and the uncertainty, around such a proposal, we came across staff a relatively, I would call it relatively simple capital project or project recently that had the low bid at a dollar amount and the high bid at 5x. So that uncertainty, and there were 6 bidders, and it was literally across the spectrum. 3 might have been close, but 2 were like, yeah, if you guys want to throw the money our way, we'll do it. So I think there might be that, but I think I'm certain that we've structured situations like this in the past to say it can be a not to exceed, it can be however the town wants to protect itself, and I even look over at legal a little bit for contracting, and I think we can build in the protections
Okay. That's
financially.
Yeah.
Is there a ceiling that you're thinking about, Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, or you're just asking in general?
I'm just asking because, if you don't have an idea of how far it could go, who knows how far it could go? I mean, I just, I want to be sure that, but I'm also very concerned that we get the product that we want, which means the process has to be, one that we trust.
Sure.
Okay, and then, I think for now, that might be it. You mentioned something on the council priorities. The downtown study, is there a dollar figure that is going to be set aside for that? Or?
I'm going to look in the audience. I believe it was $300,000 for the downtown area. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And, but it's an economic development in ARPA funding, so it's all reliant on ARPA. That's what I guess I'm asking.
You're looking at this slide right
Yeah.
here, right there where it says,
Okay, in ARPA.
That 300 $100,000 identified under economic development is not related
That's
to the
not for
downtown.
that. That's for
So-
the-
So that, okay, so we're saying 300,000 above that.
Correct.
Okay, that's where, that's the
Correct.
clarification I wanted. Okay. And, that might be. I think the rest of my questions will come when we get to the next round. Yeah. Thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Very helpful.
Councilmember. Any more questions? Nothing for Brett? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't have any either. Thank you so much, Brett.
Of course. Thank you for the direction and the opportunity.
And so direction is clear. Town Manager Tony, Brett, the comments you've heard tonight. Didn't seem like it was that many. Everybody was just kinda like, good job. Few clarifying questions here and there.
Was that one note about parking?
Mayor Pro Tem now on parking. Yes, correct. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just actually, the question about parking kind of brought it up. Can you walk me through it? There's a lot of information. Can you walk me through reasoning why it's not included at the moment, kind of like this park studies, because we're waiting on council decision to, kind of give you more of a guide to actually put it into the budget, or is it something that you're still looking at? Why, can you walk me through that? Please?
Yes. We chose, I chose not to include it as part of the development preparation, budget development preparation at this point, really based on experience that if we move forward with a parking initiative in year 0, you're going to have a relatively substantial capital outlay, whether that's, maybe capital outlay is the wrong term, but deciding on how you enforce, whether you're putting gates in and barriers literally in for parking, or if you're paying to monitor, it's going to offset a significant portion of any revenue opportunities, if not be more than the revenue for fiscal year 1. So to me, it was not necessarily valuable at this point to incorporate those assumptions into a presentation to council. We're happy to do that, and I'm happy to take that as a takeaway and scenario plan. Say, if we do this with this technology, this could be the cost, and this is the revenue upside.
If I may, to be really clear, I anticipate an increased operating deficit. That's what I would like to see budgeted around. I would like to see no revenue. That's not, the point is simply to not tie our hands from implementing the plan we've been circling for a little while. I don't, the substance of my comment is not to try and see more revenue.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was kind of my question around. I appreciate your thinking around it, and I appreciate all the work that's been put in there. But I would like to see some kind of scenarios, given that we've had this conversation for some time, and I don't want to, similar to Mayor Pro Tem, I don't want to be in a situation we come back in August, whenever it is we come back, we decide in November we're going to move forward with this parking study, and then we have to wait a substantial amount of time. We can move not park study, but parking stuff, whatever we want to call it. So I appreciate that, and that would be really helpful for me to at least look at as we go into this. And again, to all the staff and everyone who's been working on this, huge appreciation. And thank you for my colleagues for asking all the questions I had. So, Madam Mayor, I yield back.
What else? Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
I know you've been trying to sit down. Go ahead.
I'm good.
Here's some water. Take a seat. Thank you so much. Motion to adjourn.
It's looking like a Pelicans night. I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. We adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We are adjourned.
Pelicans do.